Hi everyone, welcome to today's class. We're going to talk about attacking games in the Sicilian. So I have 5 games prepared. We will see how many we can get through, hopefully all of them. Also included some of my games. I'm an e4 player and I like facing the Sicilian. So we'll be looking at things from White's point of view and some ideas for White of how to attack in the Sicilian. So, okay, so we have people in class and people on stream. So I'll try to pay attention to both. So first game we're gonna look at is between Alexandra Kosteniuk and Irina Krush. This is from the 2021 online Olympiad, and I think this was some kind of a playoff between US and Russia, so very important game. So Alexandra Kosteniuk, she's actually playing really well lately. She has recently won the Women's Grand Prix, so very strong player, and Irina Krush is an 8-time US Women's Champion. So very high level game. So Kosteniuk is playing white, knight f3 d6, and Krush is an avid Sicilian player. She really sticks to her Sicilians. And knight c6. So we have the 4-knight Sicilian or the classical Sicilian. So it's also, of course, possible in this position. Black has several moves, so knight c6 is one. a6 is the knight orf. Oops. I forgot this is not easy in chess base. e6 with the Scheveningen and g6 with the dragon. So a lot of moves here for black. Oops, didn't mean to do that. So Black chooses to play knight c6, which is one of Irina's pet lines. She does like to play this classical Sicilian quite a lot. So there's, again, for White, quite a few setups here. So White can always choose to play bishop e2 and just castle kingside, just like in any kind of Sicilian. And also there's this line with bishop c4. And the downside of this variation for White, like this bishop e3 move, which is a move that I like to play against a lot of Sicilians, this English attack, like bishop e3, f3, queen d2, doesn't really work out really well here because there's annoying knight g4 move. And if the bishop moves back, unlike in the knight orf when the queen goes to b6, this knight on d4 is under attack. So bishop g5 is played, which is, I think, is the most challenging move here for Black. Pawn goes to e6 because Black doesn't really want to allow taking the knight. So queen d2, bishop e7, and castle. So in a lot of Sicilians, we do see this opposite side castles because Black is taking so long to develop and castle and do all that. It gives White enough time to castle on the queen side. And also because in open Sicilian, when we play d4, cd, knight d4, we open the queen side first. We open the queen side very quickly, so it doesn't take that long to castle on the queen side, because usually castling on the queen side takes longer, right? Because you have to develop 3 pieces. So it's a bit faster in the Sicilians. And also, of course, Black is taking so long to develop. So bishop g5, e6, queen d2, bishop e7, and castle. And in this position, Irina played a6. And I think a6 is, in some lines, can be considered a bit dubious too even. The main line here is to play castle, f4. So White's idea is to attack on this side, and Black is, of course, going to be attacking on the queen side. So knight d4 takes queen a5, and this is a huge theory in these lines, with the idea that e5 immediately doesn't work out because after knight d5, this doesn't quite work out because this hangs with a check. But in the game instead, what am I doing? a6 was played and now takes, and Black basically allows this, taking on f6, and so now taking on f6 is not ideal because after takes, this c6 pawn also hangs. Sometimes in these lines, Black sacrifices this pawn and allows this. and just gives up this pawn and then plays against this structure, but usually in positions where this pawn is on b7, not when they also ruin their pawn structure. So for this reason, Irina takes f6, the bishop goes to c4, and now black castles. Which looks like a very scary decision for black, because black has ruined their pawn structure and castled kingside, but if we think about it, how to attack in this position for white, it's not very clear, right? Because pushing these pawns doesn't really go that far, because black will just simply ignore it. So for example, if white goes g4, even if I allow all of this, it's possible for me to even allow this, let's say something like this. Okay, maybe I'm playing a bit reckless. But like, for example, black allows something like this, and all of a sudden this bishop comes to life, right? And then this rook is attacking. So this actually might even benefit black, this kind of pawn pushes. So all of a sudden, because this pawn structure has changed, this pawn attack is not so clear anymore. And I don't know why this pawn keeps moving. And we know whenever we castle on opposite sides, this pawn attacks are very common, because when our king is on the other side of the board, we don't have to worry about opening that side of the board anymore. So instead, she plays rook h1, and Kosteniuk is attacking with the pieces. So after king h8, which makes a lot of sense because the king's position is compromised. So what I said about the pawn attacks not being so clear, even so, this king's position is not exactly safe, right? Because in the long term, it's possible that this black king will come under attack. So it's not like the safest king, even though there's like no direct pawn attack coming. So king h8 is a very sensible move, because in the future she can bring the rook into defense, and rook e3. So white's idea is to attack with the pieces, because there is an open g file on the king. It makes a lot of sense to bring a rook into the attack. And if we look at the position, so this knight here is a bit useless, because cannot really go to d5. And this bishop would actually prefer if this e4 pawn wasn't here, because then the bishop could go to d3 and attack this pawn. So it makes more sense for white to attack with the heavy pieces. So rook g8, and now f4, with the idea of shifting the pieces to the king side. So d5, queen e2, shifting the queen to h5, and also because of the pin, the bishop is not hanging. Oh my god, what is wrong with this program?
What's happening?
No, I mean, it's whatever, it's nothing wrong with the program. It's like I click on a thing and it moves on a square, so there's nothing actually wrong with the program.
Oh good, it's not on us then.
No. Okay, so now the position starts to get quite crazy. Also, I have to mention this is a rapid game, and of course in rapid games, especially like rapid online games, we see a lot more excitement, a lot more tactics. So bishop d6, and now f4 is hanging, and also the c4 bishop might be hanging, right? Because we're breaking this pin. So white plays e5. Takes. So of course something like this, we can take with the rook, we can take with the pawn. This is just horrible, this pawn structure. So instead, black moves the bishop, attacking the rook. The rook goes to the other side of the board, and now that things really get tactical, so black decides to check and takes the bishop, which is an understandable decision, because if you don't take the bishop in this position, then this bishop will actually slide back, and this change of the pawn structure is going to be very helpful for white, because the bishop went from like this position, right, where the bishop is locked in. All of a sudden the bishop went to this pawn structure where this diagonal is now open, so the bishop will go to d3 and just attacking this h7 square. And if we think about it and think about black's king, this king doesn't have that many defenders, because if we just look at the position again, so this c5 bishop, so if we think about what's a target, is this h7 pawn, right? That's what white is going for. So the c5 bishop cannot be of use. This bishop is way too far away Like, it's really hard to imagine any kind of a route for this bishop to get to the king side quickly. Like, if the bishop was on g6 or f5, would be very helpful for black. And so these are the main defenders. And it's also possible that maybe like rook a7, f6, somehow bring this rook in, something to do in the future. This chat is so chaotic, like I don't even understand what it's about. Okay, so in this position, black decides to take on c4, which actually is not accurate. So the correct way of playing was to take on g2, queen h5. I was analyzing this with an engine. It's kind of hard to analyze without. And there's this move of rook g3, which is removing the defender, even though it's giving up a pawn. And rook g3 is a really nice move because without this rook, this king is super lonely, right? And something like bishop d3 would be game over. So taking this is, of course, very bad because you just get mated here. So this is impossible. So rook g3 is a strong move, so black has to take. But now after something like queen f7, again, this king is in a vulnerable situation. Taking is impossible because of mate. And black, like the position is very dangerous for black here. Okay, but instead she decides to take on c4. And now white plays knight e4. And the difference is now queen g2 loses tactically because the knight is part of the game. And earlier at some point I mentioned like this knight is so useless, right? Because it was on c3, couldn't go to e4. There's a pawn, there's a white pawn here, and it couldn't go to d5 because it would just be captured. But now knight joins the attack. So even though black is up a piece, more attackers are joining the game. So this is actually becoming very problematic for black. And here there is a tactical solution here already, taking advantage of this knight being in the game. So white can already take. And the problem is after take, knight f6, the king cannot run on the g file because we take the queen. And if the king goes to h6 or h8, then we're just going to simply win a queen. So queen h6. And if rook g7, this leads to that Arabian, like a version of Arabian mate with the knight and a rook. And if king e7, then we take on g8. And again, taking back is impossible because mate is coming. So this is just game over. So the only way I think was that queen g7 and giving up the queen. And again, it's taking the queen is not possible because of mate, which is actually really nice because white has given up all the pieces, just attacking with a knight and a rook. So, but in this position, after taking this piece, basically black is kind of committed to hanging on to this piece almost because otherwise the position will be too bad. For example, even if this queen moves, so knight f6 will be very strong with the same ideas. It's impossible to defend because of mate. But even if we take on c5, like this knight, this knight versus this bishop, like this knight just completely dominates this bishop, and this pawn structure is just really hideous for black because I did not mean to do that, because if we look at these pawns, they're all on light squares, like every single pawn is on a light square, and black has a light squared bishop. So again, it's very hard to imagine how this bishop is ever going to join the game. So black just long term is always going to suffer and almost like playing down a piece. And after winning this piece back, oh my god, I need to stop making this move. After winning this piece, this knight can once again join the attack, and black will face the same kind of problems. So knight e4, queen e5, so she took this. And now rook h5 was played. So again, not clear where this queen can go. If the queen goes to this side, so we can... So here I don't want to take on c5 as much because now this pawn can move, the bishop can come to life, but something like knight g5 looks very bad because h7 is just hanging. So instead black played f5, and now in this position white found a tactical way of just already ending the game. Oh, actually after queen g7 the line that I had analyzed was takes, and here. Again, like this, we see this is the second time we see trading pieces. And which is very interesting because when we talk about attacking, we know like when you're attacking, you're not supposed to trade pieces. But here we're trading our opponent's basically only defensive piece. And once you get rid of this piece, then black just has no more defenders left. So it's just the king and the queen alone, and white has a queen, knight, and a rook to attack with, and black only has one defender. So that's not a formula for success to have one defender against 3 attackers. So instead f5 was played, and now there is a really beautiful move here by white. So now because of the king's position, like if white could take on h7, it would be checkmate. And now we see how these queens are facing off. So now tactically white is just completely winning with this beautiful move of knight g5. So threatening mate and threatening the queen. So taking is impossible because mate. And it's impossible to defend both at the same time. So in the game, black went queen c7. And again, it's possible to take on h7, but here white has a really brilliant move because the queen cannot really move away from attacking h7. So white find a way to deflect the queen. Like this is possible, but now this attack is really slowing down because white has run out of pieces, even though white won a queen. Now they don't really have any more pieces left to attack with. So instead, after queen c7, white plays queen e5. A really beautiful move, attacking this queen on c7 and checking the king. So taking is impossible because of the checkmate that we saw. So it's just a really beautiful checkmate. And there's really no other move. Queen g7, again, checkmate. So instead, rook g7 was played. And after rook g7, she continues with the same idea that the pieces are overworked. So actually in this position, taking on e5 it would still be impossible because of rook d8. So for example, if I pass the move, this is still a mistake. Funny enough. But in this position, taking advantage of this overworked queen, white plays another beautiful move, rook d8. And after taking, it's just checkmate. So really powerful game by Kosteniuk, a great attacking game. Yeah, a lot of like tactical themes involving in one game, going after this king, and I thought this was a really well game played by Kosteniuk, bringing the rooks in and then sacrificing that knight, that bishop, just to bring the knight in, and this really nice tactic with queen a5 followed by, where are we? Like this queen e5 following the same theme with rook to d8. Okay, so this was our first example. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so I'm seeing both YouTube and Twitch chat, so it's a bit chaotic, but okay. So let's move on. So the second one is actually one of my games. So this was from the Olympiad, and this was actually in-person Olympiad. So the one that we saw was online Olympiad. And the Olympiad is it's my favorite tournament. It's a team tournament. You know, you represent your country. You have teammates. Very unusual for chess to have teammates. Usually, you just play on your own. So this was from 2018 Olympiad. I was playing on third board for the US team. And we're doing quite well the whole Olympiad. We're fighting for medals. We ended up losing to Ukraine in the final match, and we didn't medal. Otherwise, we're having a really great event. So this one we are playing against Italy, and I think this was in the middle of the tournament. I think this was like round 7 or 8. It wasn't towards the end. But at this point, it was like important to keep winning matches so we could be on the top boards. So I'm playing with the white pieces. So what I mean by chaotic, because I see Twitch and YouTube chat together, so like they're not like continuous, because there's like 2 different chats. Okay, so I'm playing with the white pieces. So I start with e4, and my opponent plays the Taimanov. So this is a very different setup from we just saw. So in the other position, the pawn was on d6, and here the pawn stays on d7, which gives black a lot more flexibility in some regard, because now the bishop in some lines can get out, in many lines actually, and sometimes the pawn just stays on d7. And sometimes black just never plays pawn to d6, and if black does manage to play pawn to d5, then they get to do it in one move. And in general, in all of Sicilians, black's main idea is to play pawn to d5. And if black manages to trade this pawn for this pawn without like ruining their pawn structure, without ending up with an isolated pawn, then black is doing really well. So I played knight c3, queen c7, and f4. Again, one of the lines to play here. Another line that I used to play was this one, and bishop b4, f3, but I didn't really like these positions. Actually, I think I do better. Well, okay, not lately, because lately I've just been struggling all over the place. But like in these pawn structures where the pawn structure is not fixed, when the pawn is still on e6, I kind of had trouble with these positions because this d5 move is coming, this e5 move is coming. So I kind of prefer this more fixed pawn structures. And yeah, so there is also, oops, bishop e3, yeah, so there's also some queen e3 move. So instead, but I like this f4 line, and I've played this several times. I also played this in the World Cup, so I have quite a bit of experience here. So she went a6, and now, of course, developing with bishop d3 is not possible. The knight is hanging, and bishop e3, now that the pawns are on f4 and e4, can run into bishop b4. And now knight, so you take on c6. And in this position, black has 3 options. All of them are playable, taking with either pawn or with the queen. And they just lead to very different pawn structures, and it's just a matter of what kind of pawn structure black wants to play with. So she took with the b pawn, which I think objectively is supposed to be the best way for black to play. Bishop d3, d5. So now in this position, it doesn't make as much sense for me to castle queenside anymore. Because this b file is open, it's going to take me too many moves, and so I'm ready to castle on the king side. So I play queen e2 and castle here. So the idea for me here is to, because again black is taking a bit of time to castle, and I'm already developed in castle, to try to get some kind of an attack in. And so there's a lot of like, I guess, tension with the pawn structures, because black doesn't really want to take on e4, even though she did in the game, and she had a specific idea, but generally like taking on e4. So black does have this kind of a pawn structure, right? So these pawns are together, it's a pawn island, so it makes sense. But once they take on e4, for example, now we see that these pawns all of a sudden just become very weak. But at the same time, in this kind of position, once this happens, I really wish my pawn wasn't on f4 because the pawn is kind of misplaced here. So there's this interesting tension, and sometimes black just leaves this pawn structure as it is and just doesn't move it at all. Sometimes they try to play with c5 and just kind of wait to see what white does. And sometimes black also just doesn't castle because they just try not to get attacked. But here my opponent was prepared for me and she had a specific idea in mind. So she played bishop e7. I develop my bishop, castled, and I bring my rook to the center. So now I'm getting ready to play like e5 and f5. So now tactically for her, playing c5 is not possible because I simply take and now the bishop is hanging. So this is not a possibility for her. And I can start thinking about pushing e5 and f5. And so she has to find a move in this position. So she plays g6. And so g6 is a very interesting possibility for her. And the point is, whenever we have these moves e6 and g6, the way for me to react is to play f5. But playing f5 for me is impossible because after taking, this f5 pawn is going to hang. And if I play e5 myself, then playing f5 in the future is going to be almost impossible, right? Unless I play g4, but because my king is on this side, playing g4 is quite dangerous for me because my king is here, so it's quite risky. Unlike in the other position, if I'm castle queenside, like if my king was on c1 here, like easily I would just play h4, g4, I just push all these pawns and just attack. But because my king is here, it carries some risks to also open up my king. And now her ideas are simpler. Something like c5, bishop b7. So instead I just, I think g6 was already a move I wasn't familiar with. So I kind of play like a almost nothing move, just move my king out of the way. Because in this position there are some lines where she can actually check and take my pawn. And then ask me like, where is my compensation? So I was like, okay, just put your king on h1. So they take on e4. I take, so she takes, and a5. So if I'm remembering very correct, like well, even though this was like all over 4 years ago, actually I was still playing here very fast. So her idea is to develop her bishop on this side, and again she has some pawn weaknesses. But if we exchange a lot of pieces, if we exchange going to some kind of an endgame without the heavies, then it might be very difficult for me to prove any kind of advantage. So in this position, oh my god, it's with these arrows. Okay. So in this position, if we think about this pawn structure, so I have a pawn majority on the queen side, which means I have more pawns than my opponent. So it's 3 versus 2, and my opponent has a pawn majority on this side, right? She has 4 pawns, and I have 3 pawns. So in the endgames, this would be very, very interesting dynamic. So I didn't want to allow this bishop a6 because if she plays bishop h6, it's a skewer, so it will force me to go back and exchange bishops, and I didn't want to exchange. So I decided to play rook f3. So bishop a6, I move my queen away, so she brings a rook to the center. Very logical. So in this position I was thinking maybe rook c3 can be a threat, and another reason why I wanted my bishop to stay on d4. So the reason I didn't want to play pawn to c4, as someone mentioned in this position, is because I wanted to keep the option of playing rook c3 and attacking this pawn. Because if I play c4, then attacking this pawn will just be impossible. So weaknesses are really weak if you can attack them. If your opponent has a weakness, but you can never ever reach that weakness, then maybe it's not such a huge problem. So I didn't want to put my pawn on c4. I wanted to keep this rook c3 move alive. And something to keep in mind in the future, because when I look at this position, this c6 pawn really stands out to me. Like, I don't have much of an attack, even though this game did end in an attacking win. I don't really have an attack here because of this pawn structure. Like, I'm not gonna play g4 anymore with the center open like this, because it's just too risky. Cannot go f5. She will just take. So don't have much of an attack. So my main target is now her queenside pawns, this c6 pawn and this a5 pawn. So that's why I wanted to keep this option open. So here she plays rook d8, very logical move, getting out of the pin and bringing the rook into the game. And I think if I go here, I think she can take and go bishop b4. I thought this was a possibility, or even bishop b4 immediately. So instead I decided to put my bishop on c3. And I was expecting her to play bishop b4 and exchange these bishops, even though this might feel counterintuitive. Because she has this weak king, so you would think she wants to keep her bishop. But because my king is on this open diagonal, that's not the diagonal we're trying to make, that's the diagonal. Because my bishop is on this open diagonal, it's actually quite scary for her. So the rook is on d8. I cannot go queen to d4. But if my queen ever goes to d4, it's going to be devastating for her. But instead she played rook to fe8. And I was like, okay, so at least now I get to keep my bishop. It's not much. But if I go a3, at least now she cannot force an exchange. And again, like now this a5 pawn is a weakness, so if in some position somehow I manage to play queen e1, this pawn on a5 will become a target. So she has to think about how to defend it. And which again, it's not so easy for me to play queen e1 because there is no good square for a rook. But in the long term, I was like, okay, maybe she can face some problems. Instead, she played bishop to d6. So I think she also wasn't super familiar with this opening. I think she had something prepared. She was playing very fast. It's always unpleasant when your opponent is playing very fast, especially in this really high stakes tournament like the Olympiad, where you're playing for a team, you're playing for your country. But I think she also wasn't very familiar, so she played this opening and then she kind of got lost, which is something happens when we just memorize some theory, we don't know structures really well. This happens to players of all levels. So she played bishop d6. And this is actually a huge blunder because all of a sudden her king is becoming super weak. And I think her idea was to counter queen d4 with a move like e5. And like if the center opens up, this can actually become a huge problem for me because I have some back rank weaknesses, right? Because I have one rook on the back rank, and this rook cannot go to the back rank because of the bishop. And all of a sudden, maybe I can run into some issues here. And like she's really well equipped for the center to open because all her pieces are in the center, and my rook is just sitting on f3 for no reason. So instead, so bishop d6. But instead here I have a very strong move, which is queen h4, and queen h4 immediately runs into, she runs into big problems because of this move, because I have a very strong threat in this position. So maybe someone can figure out what the threat is. So if it's white to move, so white has actually several threats in the position. So okay, so very obvious one is queen f6, right? Because if I put the queen on the diagonal with the bishop, that looks like mate.
Yeah, but you can take on h7 too.
Yeah, so if she plays bishop e7, then immediately queen h7. So actually my biggest threat is queen h7 because it's just mate. And this is just forced mate. So after queen h4, I think her position is objectively already, I don't know if it's lost, but it's very close to being lost. Because if she goes f5, I can still play here. So now I'm threatening mate. So if she takes, I have mate. And if she plays e5, ooh, I have all kinds of moves here. I can take on f5, take on c6. What is it? I can take on e5 maybe even. I think taking on f5 should be good. So you cannot take back, that's mate. And you cannot really take here, that's gonna be mate. I guess queen f7 will be a move. But what's wrong with taking on e5? This is such a strange move, bishop to c6. Taking on f5 looks good. Oh, I guess there's queen e7 maybe? Actually here maybe I even have rook g3 threatening g6. I mean, I have a lot of threats in this position. And okay, f5, I think even if I play something like bishop d3, it's not really a move she wants to play. Instead she played e5. And now I go rook h3 with the same threats. So something like this. So instead of checking, I just go bishop f6, unstoppable mate the next move. So she went f5 out of desperation. So after queen h4, her position just immediately, like one careless move, and her position just falls apart. So now rook h3, so f5, and now I take. And now her position is really falling apart. So she took on f5, taking here. Let me remember what's the way. I think bishop e6 was good. Let's see what's the easiest way of. Oh, e1 is hanging. What's the easiest way of winning here? I think this should be. I mean, bishop e6 looks good to me. I mean, this looks like it's going to be mate. Because rook g6 is still a threat. I'm up material. This looks very strong for me. I can't remember what I was thinking during the game at this point. But I think bishop e6 is very strong. But in the game she took here. But now she gets mated on this side. So king to f7 and now takes. So now I'm threatening mate in one on f6. So she takes. And now queen h7, and I'm winning a queen at the very least, because okay, so she cannot go back, it's mate. And if she goes like f6, okay, f6 rook g6 is mate. And if she goes here, queen c7. You're not the only one who doesn't remember, always remember what we were thinking during the game. Okay, this game is like 4 years old, so I remember some things. This was a memorable game because this was an important victory for us. That because after this, I think maybe we played. Maybe this was actually round 9, and then we played China the next round or something. Actually, let me see. I'm gonna maximize it for a second and see. Okay, no, this was. Oh, I messed up. I'll fix it. No, this was round 8. So I think in round 10 we played China, we drew. So in round 9 we played. Who did we play after Italy? I think we beat another team, and then we drew China, and then we lost in the final round. Oh, I think maybe we played Hungary, and then we beat Hungary too. And so this was like very important for us. I think we won this match 3-1. So we had 1 win and 2 more draws. I think it was, our team was Irina, Anna, no, it was Anna, Irina, me, and Jennifer Yu. Sabina Foysher, Jennifer Yu, but this particular lineup was Anna, Irina, me, and Jennifer. I want to say Jennifer drew. She had some kind of opposite color bishop endgame. And who else won? Maybe everyone drew, maybe. No, I wasn't the only one. Someone else won on the team. Okay. This was a long time ago. The glory days of our team. Okay. And we probably don't have time for every game, so let's see which one. Which one I can show. So there is a Magnus game, and there is okay, maybe we can get through 2 games actually. Do I have an Olympiad medal? I have a medal. I have a team medal. I don't have an individual one. I have one from 2008, which is the last time our team medaled. We were very close in 2018. I think a draw would have been enough, and last Olympiad also. Last Olympiad we tied for 3rd in India with the Indian team. We beat them and then we tied with them, but we lost on tie breaks, like very, very close, few match points. So that was actually quite painful. Okay. So let's move on to this game. So this is from the European Club Cup. In Europe, they have a lot more team tournaments. They have the Bundesliga, they have European Team Championship. They have all kinds of tournaments. Club Cup is some kind of a club tournament, so it's not based on countries or anything. It's whoever the club invites to play. So against 2 very strong GMs, well, actually not. White player is a strong GM, Yuriy Kryvoruchko from Ukraine, almost 2,700. Actually, I'm not sure who the black player is, but let's take a look. So knight f3, d6. So in this position, the first game we size with knight c6, and then we say that a6 is a move, e6 is a move, g6 is a move, and here black plays some kind of a sideline, probably trying to avoid any kind of theory, and plays bishop to d7, which is kind of a non-committal move, trying to avoid any kind of like deep theory, but actually ends up in a bit of a bad position. So f3, bishop c6, and bishop e3. So black wastes a lot of time putting the bishop on c6. Usually we get this kind of a position from neither, like something like this. And the bishop goes to e6, which is only one move. And the bishop actually does really well on e6. So we get like this kind of a structure in the English attack. But instead, black decides to play bishop d7 and bishop to c6. And I think there are some downsides to the bishop being to c6, because the bishop actually on e6 is more annoying for white, because this knight goes to c4, the bishop at some point goes to c4. It's just bishop is more of a supportive piece there. So white continues with their same, with the same plan of castle and queenside. And this setup that white does, white can do this setup against different kind of Sicilians. For example, against the dragon, white does this bishop e3, f3, queen d2, this English attack, against the Najdorf, against the Scheveningen, against the classical Sicilian. That first game with side wasn't possible with the same move order. But this is a really nice setup. I've played this for years. I really like it because the attack is just kind of flows naturally, because she just this pawn just this f3 pawn supports this g4 g5 push. So our idea is to just push this pawns all the way to g6. Okay, so pawn to a6. So g4, and now we see kind of a typical attacking with pawns on different parts of the board. So white is attacking with this g4, g5 moves, and black is going to be pushing their pawns. Okay, I need some water. Another huge downside. Wow, this water did not help. So another big downside for black in this kind of positions is this pawn on d6. So the pawn on d6 is a backwards pawn, and the problem is white is completely controlling this d5 square. So whenever you have a weakness of an isolated pawn, backwards pawn, you want to get rid of that pawn because it's just a long-term weakness. So black would really love to be able to play d5, but it's not really possible because d5 is just under control. So like strategically, this is a huge problem for black in these types of positions. So b5, g5, and the knight went to e8. And in this position, black really has to think about what to do with this knight, because maybe the knight should go to h5. And the whole point of putting a knight to h5 is to stop this push of the pawns, because just physically stopping the pawn from going to h4 and h5. But this kind of a move can also potentially run into something like knight e2, knight g3. For example, if knight d7, knight g3. Like this kind of a trade is, we can see, is already very problematic for black, because after a move like queen h2, this h7 pawn is just is an open h file, right? So it becomes impossible to defend. So opening this h file for free is not really something black wants to do. So in this position, black went to knight to e8, but now, so white plays king b1, which is just a nice move to play in these positions where you castle queenside, put the king away. So like this pawn never ever hangs with a check or an attack, and the king is just safer there. So sometimes, you know, they say that castling queenside takes 2 moves, because you castle queenside and then you have to play king b1. So knight goes to d7, now h4. So white's idea is very simple, to just push, push. So if I like pass the move, just to show what the idea is. So like when we go here, the normal reaction is to like take and then go h6, but here because we have this sacrifice. And because if the king was still on c1, there would be a bishop g5 check doing this. But because the king has been moved away, then this is just mate.
Very loud kid.
That is a very loud kid.
It is made more
I mean, yes. Yeah, so, and another problem is in this kind of positions, like there's this bishop that comes from this side. So this is white's general idea. So black plays b4, chasing this knight away, and a5. So the idea is to start some kind of a counter play here. But again, because black has wasted so much time with bishop d7, bishop c6, black is just behind in this position. And when we're playing a Sicilian, when we're castling on the other side of the board and attacking, it really becomes a matter of tempo and whose attack is going to be faster. So wasting time with bishop d7, bishop c6 is just too much. So knight goes to g3. So f5 is a really nice square for the knight, because the knight cannot be kicked away. And like the long-term problems for black in this position are still there. For example, this d6 pawn. So if my knight goes to f5, this is going to really paralyze black, because the knight cannot move away, the pawn will hang. So white doesn't just have to try to checkmate their opponent. They can also try to just go after this d6 pawn and like try to like strategically get a better position. So knight goes to c7, trying to go d5. Someone mentioned this in the chat. And now bishop c4. So stopping d5. Because if black gets in d5, then this will solve a lot of black's problems, because no more backwards pawn and black's pieces start to get in. So bishop b5, trying to trade these pieces. White plays queen e2. So trade, and I think this move shows like nerves, or like black just couldn't play this bad position anymore. Black plays g6, which I can understand, because allowing this knight on f5 just feels really bad. And when we think about this position, and again, thinking about strategically and not from like attacking point of view, whenever you have an isolated pawn or a backwards pawn, the bishop that is of the opposite color is the bishop you want to keep. So if your isolated pawn, like this d6 pawn, is on a dark square, so black really needs to keep their light square bishop. Because if we look at this position, this e7 bishop is just horrible. And the problem with the e7 bishop is just always going to be a bad piece because of the pawn structure, because all these pawns are here. But because of this, all these pawns are in the dark squares, this makes the light square bishop very strong. So exchanging these light square bishops, like again, strategically is a tough decision for black to make, but I think black just didn't want to, again, this mysterious moves that I'm making. Black just didn't want to allow this pin and somehow like h5, g6, and just, white just rolling this pawns down the board and just mating this king. So I think black just had to make some kind of a strategic concession. But after this exchange, so now the knight will go to f5, and it will be impossible to kick this knight away from f5. There is no bishop to do anything with it. And with the knight on f5, then these pieces start to hang, right? Because now d6 pawn just comes under attack. And a lot of problems in black's position. So black had to play, I think, something like this and then go d5 and give up this pawn. But still, the position is just objectively very bad. Instead, they played g6, which of course cannot feel good to play this kind of a move, but I think they just kind of did it out of desperation. And immediately h5. Of course, against g6, h5 is such a natural reaction, opening this file. So taking this doesn't work out because both of these knights hang. So black is losing black is losing 2 pieces. So instead they played knight to e6. So white takes. So in this kind of position, black would love to be able to take with this pawn and put a rook on f7 so they can cover this h7 square, but of course the knight is hanging, so this is not possible. Instead they have to take with the h pawn. But now there is nothing to stop this rook, so this h file is just wide open. So if this queen somehow lands on h6, it's just going to be game over. And this is something that white starts to do. Now the queen on c4 is useless, so queen goes to e2. And the queen on e2 is simply threatening to go to h2. Well, unfortunately, the moves there show, but so king g7 played, and now white. So now, like, this is met with rook h8, so black is surviving. So there's no more checkmate. So what to do instead? This is a very common theme and very common tactic. I mean, any kind of doubling on the h file, black will play rook h8. So what we want to do is we want to get the queen first and then bring the rook. We don't want to allow rook h8. Okay. So people in the class can see. It's not a big mystery. Yeah, so here we play rook h7, and this is a very common theme in this kind of positions. So the whole point is to stop that rook from going to h8. So again, if we play here, then rook h8. But if you play rook h7, so rook h7, they just resigned. And if king here, then queen h2. And the difference is if king goes to g7, again, we don't play rook h1 and allow rook h8. So we play queen h6 first. We force the king back, so now the rook can no longer go here, and then we bring the rook in. And now this is just unstoppable mate because we have 2 mates. And this is the problem with black being forced to take h6, g6, because the entirety of the h file is open. So the queen can go to both h7 and h8, and there is no more rook f7 to save this king. And in this position, instead of king g7, if bishop g5, which makes sense because maybe now the king can try to run, and then if king survives, then it survives. Then queen h2 and king g7. So now if we take, Um, the knight takes or the queen takes, actually. Like something like this doesn't really help because the king kind of survives here. I know it doesn't look very pretty, but... And if the rook goes here, I think queen f4 should be okay. Or actually rook h8 here will be strong. Because I see sometimes when players attack, like they don't so much think about boxing their opponent's king in. It's just like this checking, especially like my beginner students when they're trying to checkmate with like a queen or something, and then I see like the king is getting checkmated on one side of the board, but they start checking, and then the king ends up on the other side of the board, and all of a sudden the king is not getting mated anymore. So I understand like this is tempting. Sometimes it works. Sometimes you can chase the king. But if you box the king in, then that's pretty much it, right? Like we did in the game. So the king gets boxed in, and that's it. The king has no escape square. So limiting the king's escape is a way to trap the king and checkmate it. And kind of the same thing here, like if we play queen h2. So queen h2 is threatening mate in 1. f6, of course, doesn't help because still mate in 1. So the king has to go to g7, and if we allow this king to run to f6, e7, maybe the king will survive there. Because these knights are not as useful in attacking, especially this b3 knight. This b3 knight is extremely useless. If the knight could go to d5, then it would be very nice. But this knight is useless, and this knight is also, this g6 pawn is limiting this knight. But instead, there's this nice tactic here of knight f5. And the idea is the same because g takes f5, bishop g5. So now if takes, again, we play queen h6, we push the king back, and then we checkmate. So we're not like checking the king. And if, okay, there's no way this works because rook d6, and now we have just mate in 2. But even in this example where we did this, like if we think about it, we're not like, again, chasing the king. The knight on f5 is also stopping the king running from running to the key squares of e7. So knight f5, they have to take, and in this position, queen g5, they have to give up the queen. And white will be up a queen, still some work ahead to try to convert this advantage of queen versus rook and a knight, but because the king is still weak, and any kind of imbalance we have that involves a queen, we have to think about the king's safety. So if it's like queen versus 2 rook, queen versus 3 pieces, if the king is weak, then the queen is very strong, and here the king is and here the king is just very bad. So after king g7, like if they played bishop g5, then this would have been the winning way, but instead in the game, king went to g7 and rook h7, and the game ended here. Okay, we had 2 more games, but well, one of them was mine, so not that important. So we didn't get the chance to look through of them, but hopefully these were useful, at least entertaining examples of the attacks in Sicilians. Some interesting themes, especially this one, I think, with opening this, how to open this H files, and with this rook h7 ideas. Well, that was it for me, unless there are any questions. Are you ending the stream?
Oh, I mean, I thought you were, when you're ready to sign off, yes, of course.
Yeah. Because I don't think I can do it from my end.
No, I didn't know you were
Okay.
ready to end. All right, well, good night.
All right, good night.